At sea, a navigator's oldest tool is simple trust. Trust in the math, trust in the instruments, trust that the world behind you stays where you left it. But what happens when something out there refuses to be left behind, and the numbers that should prove your safety begin to prove something else entirely? There are distances that cannot exist, and yet, this is dead reckoning.
The Meridian left Yokohama on a Tuesday in late October, loaded with oceanographic equipment and 6 people who had all, in their separate ways, run out of reasons to stay on land. She was not a beautiful ship. She was a working ship, 212 feet of salt-rimed steel, rust blooming at her waterline, her hull the grey of something repainted too many times and never quite correctly. But she moved well. She moved with the quiet authority that belongs to things built for a purpose and used for it. And in the first days of the crossing, the Pacific cooperated. Long swells, low wind, a sky that was more white than blue, but stayed mostly above the horizon where it belonged. Petra Vasquez navigated. She was 38, technically gifted, and had arranged her life with considerable precision around problems that had answers. The Pacific suited her. She liked its scale. 12 days out from Yokohama, the Pacific was behaving correctly. The weather was grey and cold, and the swells were long and regular, and Vasquez was settling into the rhythm that long crossings impose, that slow erosion of mainland urgency, the gradual replacement of clock time with watch time, the way the world contracts until it is exactly the size of the ship and no larger. On the 12th evening, just after sunset, she went to the bridge to log the day's position. She logged it. She checked the radar. She looked astern. There was a light. She did not think much of it at first. A light astern on the Pacific is not unusual. Shipping lanes exist for reasons. The same favourable currents, the same great circle routes, the same logic of navigation that has moved ships across this ocean for centuries. She had crossed the Pacific 3 times before. She had seen lights astern. She logged it as a contact. Estimated range, 12 to 15 nautical miles. A single white light, too steady for a vessel underway, but not wrong enough to be alarming. She noted it in the log with the same handwriting she used for fuel consumption and barometric pressure. 2,137 hours. Contact astern. Bearing 185. Estimated 12 to 15 miles. No response to hail on channel 16. She hailed once on the radio. Static. Then a carrier frequency that had no voice attached to it. The kind of sound that means something is transmitting, but not speaking. She logged that too. She went to dinner. Whitmore relieved her at 2200. He was 53 and had been on a great many ships, and he had a habit of going very still when he looked at the horizon, as though reading something written there in a language the rest of them had never learned. She mentioned the contact. He nodded, the way Whitmore nodded at most things, with the mild, private acknowledgement of a man confirming what he already knew. She did not ask him what he knew. In the morning the contact was gone. The radar showed clean water for 20 miles in every direction. The sky was pale and cold, and the ocean was doing nothing wrong. Rafe Suarez made coffee. He was 26, ran communications, very good at his job, and made coffee incorrectly but consistently. Chief Okafor replaced a faulty pressure gauge on the starboard ballast pump and was pleased about it, in the specific way he was pleased about small repairs, quietly, to himself, standing still for a moment after he had finished and looking at the work. No one mentioned the light. The second night it was there again. The second night it was 12 miles astern. The third night, 13. The fourth, 11. Not fixed, variable, but always in the same general range, always astern, always visible only after full dark, always gone by first light. Rafe had the best explanation, which was that it was a fishing vessel running without AIS, pacing them by accident on a parallel course. The Pacific had trawlers like this, older vessels, developing world-flagged, running equipment that was either broken or switched off. It happened. It was inconvenient from a navigational record-keeping standpoint, but not alarming. He said this twice, once to Vasquez, once to Torres, and both times in the flat, careful voice of someone building a structure they hope will hold their weight. Torres agreed that it was probably a trawler. She agreed in the way she agreed with most things, efficiently, with the implication that agreeing was the fastest path back to whatever she had been doing before the conversation began. Chief Okafor said nothing. He watched the light for 40 minutes on the third night, standing at the stern rail with his hands in his pockets, and then he went below without speaking. When Vasquez asked him later what he thought, he said, "I've been on this water for 30 years, and stopped there, as though that were a complete answer, which, Vasquez supposed, it might have been. On the sixth night, Rafe tried the radio again, multiple channels. He got the carrier frequency on channel 16 again, that empty transmission, presence without voice, and on channel 22A he got something else. It was a voice. Briefly, low, slightly degraded, the particular flattening of a signal that has travelled a long way over cold water. The words were not clearly intelligible. They sounded like coordinates, a long string of them, and then the frequency cleared. Rafe played the recording back 4 times. He did not sleep well that night. He told Vasquez the next morning that it was probably skip propagation, that the voice was a transmission from somewhere else, bounced off the ionosphere and landing in their receiver by accident. Skip propagation, he said, and nodded. Vasquez had looked it up. Skip propagation was real. It occurred. The coordinates in the recording were the meridian's current position. The log entry for day 19 reads, in Vasquez's handwriting, "Contact astern, bearing 183, estimated range 34 nautical miles. Third consecutive night at this apparent distance. No AIS, no response to hail, no change in relative bearing. Weather clear, moon at 60%. Contact visible to naked eye as single white light, with possible secondary warm-toned light below." 34 nautical miles is a long way. In clear conditions with a full moon, you can sometimes see a large vessel at that range, if the light is right, if the atmosphere is cooperating. It is not impossible. The problem was not that the distance was 34 nautical miles. The problem was that it had been 34 nautical miles, or very close to it, for 3 nights running. Ships do not maintain perfect relative distance without active effort. The ocean is not a road. Currents push, weather corrects. Propulsion systems are not precision instruments. If you put two vessels on parallel tracks in the Pacific with no coordination between them, they will diverge. They will converge. The gap will change. The gap between the meridian and the contact behind her was not changing, not in any way that made navigational sense. Vasquez ran the calculations twice. She sat with them at the chart table in the quiet of the late watch, with the radar sweep making its soft, patient sound in the dark, and she looked at the numbers. Something settled in her chest. Not fear, not yet. She did not show the calculations to Rafe. She did not show them to anyone for 2 days. On the 21st night, Chief Okafor came to the bridge without being called, at a time that was not his watch, and stood looking astern for a long time. He had his hands in his pockets. His face was not frightened. It was something more considered than that. The expression of a man examining a problem he had encountered before, in a different form, a long time ago. "My uncle fished the Gulf of Guinea for 40 years, he said, without turning from the window. He told me once that some waters have a way of remembering things. Not haunted. He was not a superstitious man. He meant something more like structural, the way a bone remembers where it was broken. He watched the light for another few minutes. Then, he told me that if a light stays with you on the water, you should not try to outrun it, and you should not try to meet it. What should you do? Vasquez asked. He was quiet for a moment. You learn to live with it correctly, he said, which means knowing that it is there without letting it become the thing you are always looking at. He went below. Vasquez stayed on the bridge until 0300 and did not look astern again that night, and did not sleep when her watch was done. The days remained the days. This is worth saying. The Pacific in October is a working ocean. Swells come through in long, organised sets. Weather systems move across it with the slow authority of things that have been doing this for a very long time. The meridian moved west and south, making her stations, deploying her instruments, recovering her cores. Dr. Lim worked at her samples with the precision of someone who has learned that precision is the best available protection against the scale of what surrounds you. The data was good. The sediments were telling their stories, climate records laid down over thousands of years, each layer a winter, each band of dark sediment a storm season from before anyone alive had been born to notice it. Rafe checked instruments and made coffee and monitored the radio and was, in daylight, mostly himself. Torres ran her maintenance schedule with the blunt efficiency that had always been her character. Chief Okafor made his rounds. They were a functioning crew. They worked well together in the way that small groups on long voyages either work together or stop working entirely. The meals were good. There was a routine. The light was only at night. The problem was that dusk had begun to feel different. Not threatening, not in any dramatic sense, but the last hour of daylight, the grey-orange that preceded full dark, the way the sea surface changed as the sky lost its direct illumination, the shift from afternoon watch to evening watch, had begun to carry a weight it had not previously carried. Vasquez noticed it first. Then she noticed that other people were noticing it. Then she noticed that no one was mentioning that they were noticing it. Conversations that had been running easily would, in the hour before dark, begin to wind down. People would find reasons to complete tasks, to go below, to occupy themselves with something that had a clear ending. The galley filled up earlier. The mess table was more crowded at 17:30 than it had been in the first week. No one called attention to this. They just ate earlier. And the light was always there. On the 24th night, Torres saw something different. She had the late watch. She was not usually on deck after midnight, unless the weather required it, but she had been running a diagnostic on the aft sonar transducer and had come up through the stern hatch to check the housing. The night was clear. The Pacific was doing its slow, dark breathing. The light was there, astern. Farther than usual, maybe, or closer. It was difficult to tell. She stood with her flashlight off and looked at it for a while. She was not someone who frightened easily. She did not think of herself as frightened. What she felt, looking at the light, was closer to the sensation she sometimes had when she looked at a very complex mechanical problem for long enough. The moment before the solution organized itself, when the problem had stopped being chaotic and begun to have a structure, but the structure was not yet clear. The light had a secondary source, below it slightly, warm-toned, not navigation light white, something with a different quality, more diffuse, more amber, like a lantern, like an interior light coming through a porthole. She looked at it for several minutes. Then she understood something she hadn't understood before. She had been assuming the vessel was the same size as the Meridian, or smaller, a trawler, a coastal freighter, something that would explain the AIS silence and the independent course-keeping. But a vessel that could show a visible light at 30+ nautical miles was not small. She went below. She did not mention the secondary light to anyone for 3 days. When she finally told Vasquez, she described it first as a possible reflection artifact. Then she described it as it had actually appeared. The amber light through a porthole, as though someone aboard the other ship had a lamp on, as though someone was awake. The radio room was small and warm and smelled of electronics and Rafe's particular instant coffee, which he made incorrectly but consistently. The walls were covered with the usual laminated sheets, emergency procedures, channel assignments, contact lists, the small administrative architecture of a vessel at sea. She had been in this room once before, the morning after the 6th night, looking for the channel the voice had used, not finding it. That had been 20 days ago. She had not come back because she had not known what she was looking for. She knew now, or thought she did. The 21st night log, which she had reviewed once from the bridge and moved through too quickly. 3 lines near the bottom. She had not been ready to read them carefully. The emergency contact sheet was pinned behind a bank of equipment, at a height that suggested it had not been looked at recently. The laminate had yellowed at the corners. She took it down to read the contact number she needed. The sheet listed the usual things: ship-to-shore radio protocols, Coast Guard frequency assignments, insurance emergency contacts, waypoint coordinators, and at the bottom, in a smaller font, a row of research grant sponsor logos and names, the kind of boilerplate that appears on vessels operating under scientific charter. She scanned them without real attention. Pacific Research Consortium, NOAA Pacific Division, Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology. And then, near the end, Harrow Lake Foundation, Coastal Phenomena Division. She did not recognize the name. It had the texture of an academic institution, the kind of quiet private foundation that funded oceanographic and atmospheric research at the edges of mainstream inquiry. She had seen similar names on grant documentation before. Someone had written a phone number in the margin beside it, in pencil, a different hand than any she recognized from the ship's logs. She pinned the sheet back. She found the frequency log. She left the radio room. The name stayed with her for the rest of the morning, with the mild persistence of something half familiar, not alarming, not significant, just present. The way a word sometimes stays with you after you have looked it up and immediately forgotten its definition. She did not think about it again until much later, by which point the thinking did not help. The dreams began on the 27th night. Vasquez woke at 03:40 with the specific disorientation of having been somewhere very present and finding herself somewhere else. She lay in her bunk listening to the hull and the ocean and did not immediately reach for the dream, which was the right instinct. But it waited for her. A ship. Not the Meridian, the other one. She knew this with the dream certainty that requires no evidence, the way you know a place in a dream without having seen it before. She was standing on its deck. The ocean was around her on all sides, dark, and the swells were the same long Pacific swells she fell asleep to every night. She was not afraid in the dream. That was the first strange thing. She was looking astern, from the deck of the other ship, and she could see the Meridian ahead of her, small at that distance, the Meridian's running lights, the white stern light. She was watching the Meridian the way she watched the other light every night from the Meridian's bridge. She woke before she could see who was on the deck with her. She logged it in her personal notebook, not the ship's log, her own, and went back to sleep and did not dream again. 2 days later, Rafe mentioned, carefully, that he had been having a recurring dream about being on a different ship. He mentioned it the way he mentioned most uncomfortable things, in the form of a question about something adjacent to the thing. He asked if Vasquez had ever had a dream about the contact. She said, "What was the ship like?" He described it. The deck underfoot, the swells, looking ahead and seeing the Meridian's lights from a long way off. He did not describe who else was on the deck with him. She did not ask. She told him she had had a similar dream. She said it in the same carefully measured voice she used for navigation logs and position reports. They did not discuss it further, which was almost worse. By the 30th day, Chief Okafor had begun checking the stern light housing twice during each watch, not because it needed it, but because standing at the stern rail gave him a reason to look at the water without it being the thing he was doing. Vasquez had mapped the contact's apparent position for 9 consecutive nights on a private chart she kept folded inside her logbook. She had started unconsciously timing her tasks so that she completed the ones requiring full concentration before 1700. Rafe had stopped leaving his coffee cup on the radio console during the evening watch. He had moved it to the shelf below the window line so he did not have to reach up and block his view of the astern quadrant. He had done this without deciding to do it. He noticed he had done it on the 5th night and did not move the cup back. Torres had begun running her maintenance rounds differently. The aft generator room, which she had always checked last, she now checked first. so that by the time the light appeared, she had already been through the spaces that faced astern, and she would not have to go back into them after dark. She had not told anyone she was doing this. She had barely told herself. Dr. Lim had stopped going to the stern rail entirely after sunset. She said nothing about this. She had been on this water 11 times. She had the scientist's particular talent for holding an anomaly under insufficient data and working steadily around the gap. And she had placed the contact under that heading early and kept it there with both hands. Whitmore went to the stern rail every night. He stood there for exactly 40 minutes. He watched the light. Then he went below. No one had organised any of this. No meeting had been held. No announcement had been made. The crew of the Meridian had, over 30 days, independently and without discussion, restructured their working day around the nightly appearance of a ship that might or might not exist. Not an intrusion. Part of it. The 32nd night brought fog. The Pacific fog that comes in from the north in October is a particular thing. Not the coastal fog of harbours and headlands, but a deep water fog that moves with the current and thinks nothing of filling 100 miles of ocean from surface to 200 feet with uniform grey obscurity. It comes without drama. 1 minute the horizon is visible, the next minute there is no horizon. There is only the Meridian and her running lights reflected back from the vapour, and the circle of visible water that the lights illuminate, and beyond that, nothing. The contact vanished into the fog the same evening. The crew's reaction to this was not, as Vasquez might have predicted, relief. It was the sensation of a sound stopping, the sudden absence of something that had been structuring the silence. Rafe had been standing by the radio console at the start of the fog watch, checking channels out of habit. He looked up once at the astern quadrant, at the grey wall where the horizon should have been, and set his coffee down below the window line without seeming to notice he had done it. He did not laugh at anything that evening. Vasquez noticed the absence of it more than she expected to. He went to the stern rail at 2100 and stood there for 20 minutes looking at the fog. Then he went below. He did not sleep well. In the morning he told Vasquez that he had had the dream again, except this time the other ship had also been in fog, and he had been standing on its deck looking toward where the Meridian should be, and had not been able to find it. "I was looking for you," he said. "Not looking for the Meridian, looking for you." He appeared to notice the phrasing after he had said it. He picked up his coffee. He checked the radio. The fog held for 2 days. On the third day it lifted slowly from the south, the visibility extending outward in grey increments until the horizon returned. Vasquez went to the bridge. She looked astern. The light was there. At 34 nautical miles, bearing 183, as though it had been there the entire time. Chief Okafor's maintenance log for day 36 reads, "Galley refrigeration compressor, replaced capacitor, running normally. Aft bilge pump, cycling correctly, no adjustment. Port navigation light, housing inspected, seal intact. Chronometer. Unit has been reading 0334 since approximately day 31. Mechanical inspection reveals no fault. Battery normal. Movement appears to be operating correctly, except that the minute hand does not advance from the 34-minute position. Have ordered replacement unit via satellite comms. Maintaining backup time via ship's GPS clock and wristwatch. He wrote it with the same hand he used for all his entries. Steady, deliberate. The handwriting of a man who had been keeping logs since before digital records were standard, and had never stopped, because he did not trust systems he couldn't hold in his hands. Vasquez read the entry the following afternoon. She looked at it for a while. She had seen the chronometer, the old mechanical one mounted in the chart room, the backup to the GPS time display. She had not noticed when it had stopped. She was not certain she had looked at it recently. She went to the chart room and checked it. 03:34. The second hand moving, the minute hand still. It was a mechanical fault. Chronometers failed. They were old instruments, precise but fragile, and the salt environment aboard a vessel was not kind to fine mechanisms. It was not unusual. She set her wristwatch against the GPS time and went back to the bridge. That night she woke at 03:34. She was not sure what woke her. She lay in her bunk and looked at the ceiling, and the ship settled around her, and the ocean moved beneath her, and after a few minutes she went back to sleep. She woke at 03:34 the following night, and the night after that. 3 nights, the same time. No alarm, no sound she could identify. She mentioned it to no one. On the 38th night, Whitmore told Vasquez something. He came to the bridge at the end of his watch and stood at the window for a while before he spoke. She waited. "When I was 24, he said, I was on a vessel called the Harrogate, North Atlantic run. We had a following sea for 11 days. Not unusual, but the ship behind us in the weather system was always visible. Always the same distance. My captain at the time was an old Norwegian who had been on the water since the 50s, and he watched it for a week and then told me, very quietly, the way he told you things that were important, that some ships carry their crossings with them." He paused. Vasquez did not say anything. "Not haunted," he was careful about that word. He said, "A ship that has made a difficult passage, or a passage where something was lost, sometimes leaves an imprint on the water, and other ships, crossing the same routes years later, sometimes pick it up, like a wake that didn't dissipate." He was quiet for a moment. The radar swept. The ocean moved. He said the following ship was not following us. He said we were moving through a space where something had happened, and the shape of what had happened was organized around a vessel, and we were seeing the shape. "Did it stop?" Vasquez asked. "We changed course by 8 degrees, deviated from the route. It took us 2 extra days, and the owners complained, but after a day on the new heading, the following ship was gone." Vasquez looked at the astern quadrant. The light was there. 30-odd miles. Steady. "I could recommend a course change to Dr. Lim," she said. Whitmore looked at the light for a while. "We have 3 weeks of ocean left," he said, "and it found us in 11 days." He went below. Dr. Lim had been building a file. This was her method. When she encountered a phenomenon she did not understand, she documented it. She did not speculate before she had more data than the question required. She kept the file in a manila folder she had creased along both edges so it lay flat on the table without being held. She shared it with Vasquez on the 39th day. It was thorough. Contact log with timestamp, bearing, and estimated range for each of the 32 nights the light had been observed. A spectral analysis of the 2 radio transmissions Rafe had caught, the coordinates from the 6th night, and a shorter fragment from the 31st night. The shorter fragment, cleaned up, sounded like a distance reading, delivered in a voice that had the same flat, degraded quality as the first transmission. Possible words: 34 nautical miles. Dream log. She had been collecting accounts, gently over coffee, in the manner of someone having a casual conversation. All 6 crew members had described some version of the same dream, standing on the deck of a second vessel, looking ahead at the meridian, experiencing the watch from the other direction. She had tried to plot the other vessel's position using the observed bearings and the estimated ranges, adjusting for the meridian's own movement. The positions were consistent. The vessel was real, or at least geometrically coherent. It occupied a position that was consistent across multiple independent observations. "There is a ship," she said. "That part I am reasonably confident about. Whether it is an ordinary ship that is behaving extraordinarily or something else, I cannot determine from the available data." Vasquez asked about the distances. Dr. Lim looked at her own chart for a moment. "The distance should not be consistent," she said. 2 ships on parallel open ocean tracks without active coordination will diverge at the waterline. The ocean is not a highway. The current alone should produce variation of several miles per night. She tapped the log. "I do not have variation. I have 32 nights of readings that cluster around a value that should be impossible to maintain without direct coordination with our navigation system, which we do not have." "Which means?" Vasquez asked. Dr. Lim put the file away. "Which means," she said, "that I need more data." There was a night, the 40th, when the light appeared to move. Vasquez was on the bridge at 2200, running the position log, and the light was there as it always was, bearing 183, distant, and she looked at it for a while with the binoculars. The contact was bearing 183, estimated range 32 miles. She looked at the light with the naked eye. It appeared approximately where it should be for that range. Then she looked at the port quarter. There was a light there. Same character, same warm white navigation light with the amber secondary below it. She looked back astern. The first light was still there. She looked port. The second was still there. She did not call anyone. She looked at the first light. She looked at the second light. She looked back. She put the intercom down. By the time Rafe came up to relieve her at midnight, there was only one light, astern, bearing 183. She had not called Rafe for those 40 seconds because she had not known what to tell him. On the 41st night, Rafe did something he had been considering for several days. He had the evening watch. He waited until the light appeared, usual time, usual position, and then he keyed the transmitter on channel 16 and said simply, "This is the research vessel Meridian. If you are receiving, please respond." Standard maritime communication, the kind of thing you say to a vessel that isn't answering, procedural, safe. He waited. Static. The carrier frequency appeared, as it sometimes did, presence without voice. Then something else. Not a voice exactly, more like the shape of one, something at the edge of intelligibility, in the frequency range of human speech, organized in the way speech is organized, silences in roughly the right places, variations in tone, a pattern that the human ear was very ready to interpret as language. He could not make out words. He played it back 3 times. He ran it through the filtering software and played it back again. His transcription read, "Meridian, we have your position. We have been..." A long gap. "With you since..." And then the frequency cleared. Rafe sat with the recording for a long time. Then he keyed the transmitter again. "With us since when?" he asked. Nothing. He asked again. The carrier frequency ran for 11 seconds, then silence. He wrote it in the log and then crossed it out, and then rewrote it in smaller handwriting at the bottom of the page, beneath his signature, in the way you write things you need to record but are not sure what category they belong to. He did not tell anyone for 2 days. When he finally told Vasquez, she read his transcription and looked at it for a long time, and then asked, "Since when what?" The Pacific offered no answer to that question. 3 days from the California coast, the sky cleared to the deep blue that appears at the edge of weather systems. The swells shortened, the temperature rose by 3 degrees, and the ocean began to look the way it looks in pictures, bright and cold and enormous. The crew went about their work. The final stations were completed. Dr. Lim had her samples packed and labelled and was writing her preliminary data summary. Torres ran through the pre-port maintenance checklist with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to everything. Rafe arranged the communications archive and filed the voyage log, and did not annotate the entries he had been uncertain about. 3 days from port, the following ship was still there. Vasquez had stopped trying to calculate the distance in a way that would produce a logical result. She had instead developed a practice that she did not name to herself, but that resembled what Chief Okafor had described. Knowing the light was there, without making it the thing she was always looking at. She checked the astern quadrant at the start of each watch and at the end. She logged the contact. She noted the bearing. She did not look more than twice. She was not sure this constituted coping exactly. She was not sure it constituted anything. It was simply the practice she had arrived at after 41 days, and it was functioning. The night before their estimated arrival in San Francisco, she was on the bridge at midnight, and the sky was clear enough to show stars, the first real star sighting they had had in 2 weeks. And she ran a celestial fix just because she could, because navigators sometimes still did this the old way, even when the GPS was working, because it felt like a more honest conversation with the position you were in. The fix confirmed what she knew. They were where the instruments said they were. They were where they needed to be. She looked astern. The light was there, at its usual distance, at its usual bearing. And then she noticed something. She had been watching it every night for 41 days. She knew its character, the white navigation light, the amber secondary below it. She had logged it in her private chart 32 times. She had never, until this moment, noticed. The amber light was in the wrong position for a porthole. A porthole shows interior light at approximately deck level or slightly above. the horizontal position determined by the ship's structure, the light shape determined by the round or square aperture. The amber light behind them was not at deck level. It was higher. Not dramatically higher, not impossibly so, just higher than a porthole would place it. The right position for someone standing on a deck and holding a light at chest height or shoulder height. A lantern. Someone standing at a stern rail, at that impossible fixed distance, holding a lantern. She had been seeing this for 41 nights. She had been interpreting it as a porthole light. She had not been wrong exactly. The interpretation was plausible, and she had not been looking for another one. But now that she saw it correctly, she could not see it the wrong way again. She put the binoculars down. She logged the contact. She did not amend her interpretation of the amber light in the log. She wrote what she always wrote. Single white light, secondary amber. Estimated range 34 nautical miles. No deviation in relative bearing. And then she sat on the bridge chair and looked at the horizon for a while without the binoculars. At that distance, without magnification, the amber light was small enough to be almost anything. Almost a star at the waterline. Almost a reflection. Almost a match struck briefly at the edge of the world. She looked at it for a long time. She thought she saw it move. They arrived in San Francisco on the 43rd day. The bay was loud and grey and full of traffic, and the familiar clutter of the port was good in the way that ordinary things are good after a long time without them. There were container ships and tugs, and a Coast Guard vessel doing something bureaucratic near the channel markers. There was diesel exhaust and radio chatter on every channel, and the specific organised noise of a working port that has been working for 150 years. The contact did not follow them into the bay. Of course it didn't. The Meridian was boarded by customs at 09:30. The research gear was inventoried. Dr. Lim's samples were transferred to a refrigerated van and driven away. Torres oversaw the fuel and water replenishment with a thoroughness that had always been her character. Rafe filed the communications archive and had a long conversation on the phone with someone whose voice Vasquez could hear but not distinguish. He was standing near the gangway when she came down, and he nodded at her, not a goodbye exactly, something more like acknowledgement, like two people who had shared a watch and were now standing in different light. Chief Okafor called his daughters. She could hear the calls from the dock. He spoke to them for a long time. He was laughing at something when she walked past. Whitmore left the ship with a small bag and did not say much. He shook her hand at the gangway. He looked, she thought, tired in a way that she recognized, the tiredness that comes from having known something was happening and not been able to stop it, and now being on the other side of it with the knowledge still intact. "Good voyage," he said. She did not reply immediately. She was looking at the bay, the grey water, the bridge in the background, the traffic moving in and out. Normal water. Busy water. Water that did not have the quality the Pacific had developed somewhere around day 25. "Something like that," she said. He nodded and walked up the dock. She watched him go. She did not file a report about the contact. She did not know what category it belonged to. She had Dr. Lim's file on her laptop, thorough, careful, inconclusive, and she had her own private chart with 32 plotted positions, and she had Rafe's crossed-out log entry and the radio transcription, and 41 mornings of waking to find the light gone, and 41 evenings of waiting for it to return. She was going through her bag for her car keys when she found it, a page torn from her notebook, folded once. She did not remember folding it. The handwriting was hers, but the night it came from was not one she could place. A phone number. And beside it, in the same hand, Harrow Lake Foundation. She stood on the dock and looked at it. Her handwriting, her pen, the number someone else had written in pencil in a margin she had read once and pinned back to the wall. She had all of this, and she did not know what to do with it except keep it. Which was what you did when the chart had an area marked unknown, and the crossing required you to move through it anyway. You noted it. You kept your heading. You did not mark it clear. She drove home. She had an apartment in the Sunset District, 2 rooms, 4th floor, a window that looked west over the rooftops toward the ocean. She had chosen the apartment partly for that reason, and partly because the rent was reasonable, and partly because she was, despite everything, someone who did not like to be far from water. She slept for 11 hours. She woke at 03:34 and lay in the dark for a while, listening to the building and the street and the distance. She got up and made coffee and sat at the window as the city lightened. The fog was in off the ocean, and the street below was quiet. She thought about the file Dr. Lim had given her, the consistent distances, the dreams, the radio transmissions, the amber light she had spent 41 nights looking at before understanding what it was. She had left her chart case by the door. She had not unpacked it. She did not unpack it now. The Meridian had left Yokohama knowing where she was. She had navigated competently and arrived in San Francisco at the estimated time. The voyage had been, by every professional measure, successful. What Vasquez had not accounted for was the way a crossing marks the people who make it. Not a scar, something older than that. The body's knowledge of a rhythm it no longer moves to. After 41 days, her bones still knew the Meridian's engine frequency, the swell period, the timing of the night watch, the way the bridge chair sat under a late watch. She knew something else now, too. She knew the character of the light. White navigation, amber secondary, slightly too high for a porthole. And she knew, with the navigator's body knowledge, the kind that did not require verbal confirmation, that at night, at the right latitude, in the deep water west of a certain longitude, the light would be there. She did not know what that meant. She looked at her window. The fog was close enough that she could not see more than 2 blocks in any direction. The street was empty. The city was quiet. And somewhere in the apartment, she became aware of a quality of the silence that she had not been aware of a moment before. Not a sound. A particular absence of certain sounds. The way a room feels when someone else is very still in it. She did not turn around. She looked at the window, at the fog, at the pale grey morning beginning somewhere behind it, and reflected in the glass, dim at the edge of visibility, the way things appear at the edge of conditions you can barely see in at all. There was a light.
There is an old navigator's trick. When you cannot find where you are, you calculate where you must be. The crew of the Meridian were very good at this. They knew, in the end, exactly where they were. Sweet dreams. Screams do come true.